The text message arrived at 3:17 p.m., exactly 1 hour and 17 minutes. After my sister Maya was supposed to walk down the aisle, it lit up my phone with a cold blue-white light that felt alien in the warm, flower-choked air of the bridal suite. 3 words, a single sentence, stark and brutal against a backdrop of ivory lace and wilting peonies. Don't look for me, that was it. No explanation, no apology, no love, just a command, as clean and sharp as a shard of glass. My thumb hovered over the screen, my own reflection a ghostly mask in the dark glass. My heart, which had been hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs for the last hour, seemed to stop altogether. It wasn't her. That was my first thought, a primal instinctual rejection of the message. The words were wrong, the punctuation was wrong. Maya was a creature of ellipses and exclamation points, of rambling, effusive sentences that spilled over with emotion. This message was a closed door, a locked box. It was sterile, efficient, and utterly devoid of the soul of the woman I had known for all of my 26 years. Our mother, a woman held together by hairspray and sheer force of will, was pacing the antique rug, her silk dress rustling with each agitated step. When I showed her the phone, a sound escaped her throat, a thin, wounded cry that was immediately swallowed by a gasp. She snatched the phone from my hand, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the screen as she read the words over and over, as if a different meaning might materialize through sheer repetition. Julian, the groom, stood by the window, a statue of bespoke tailoring and feigned despair. He hadn't moved in nearly an hour, his back to the room, his gaze fixed on the manicured lawns of the estate, where hundreds of guests were murmuring, drinking his champagne, and waiting for a wedding that had evaporated into thin air. He turned when he heard our mother's cry, his handsome face a carefully constructed portrait of devastation. "What is it?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly performance of grief. I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was packed with sand. My mother, however, found her voice. "She's left," she whispered, the words cracking. "She's gone. She sent a text." She held the phone out to him like an offering, a piece of evidence in the trial of her own maternal failure. Julian walked over, his expensive shoes silent on the thick carpet. He took the phone, his eyes scanning the message. For a fraction of a second, just a flicker, I saw something in his expression. It wasn't shock, it wasn't grief, it was relief. A subtle, almost imperceptible easing of the tension in his jaw. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a mask of anguish so profound, it was almost beautiful. He sank onto the edge of the chaise lounge, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with what I was supposed to believe were sobs. "I don't understand," he choked out. "Why? We were so happy." My mother rushed to his side, her own distress forgotten in her need to comfort the man her daughter had just abandoned. She stroked his hair, murmuring soothing nonsense. I stood apart from them, an island of cold, silent disbelief. I looked around the room at the debris of a wedding that would never happen. Maya's dress, a confection of satin and seed pearls, hung on the armoire, a headless bride waiting for a body. Her shoes were kicked off near the vanity, one on its side. Her makeup was laid out in neat rows, a palette of colors she would never wear. And on the dressing table, next to a half-empty glass of champagne that had long since gone flat, was her clutch. A small beaded bag she was meant to carry to the reception. My feet moved without my permission. I walked over and picked it up. Inside was her lipstick, a small vial of perfume, and her driver's license. But her phone wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. It was out there somewhere, in her hand, used as a weapon to detonate all of our lives. But why was her license here? Maya never went anywhere without her ID. It was a running joke in our family. She'd pat her pockets before leaving a room, a neurotic little ritual. Keys, phone, wallet, always. The fact that her license was here, in this bag, felt like another wrong note in a symphony that was already painfully out of tune. "The police," I said, my voice sounding rusty and foreign in the quiet room. "We should call the police." Julian looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "No, Alara, please. It says don't look for her. If we call the police, it will become a spectacle. The media, think of her. She must be so confused, so scared. We have to respect her wishes." His logic was insidious, weaving a blanket of concern over a chasm of questions. My mother, desperate for a course of action that didn't involve public humiliation, eagerly agreed. "He's right, we can't. This is a family matter." A family matter. The words echoed in the opulent silence. My sister, the most dependable, loving, and meticulously organized person I knew, had vaporized on her wedding day, leaving behind nothing but a 3-word text and a room full of unanswered questions. And I was being told to let it go, to respect her wishes. But they weren't her wishes. I knew it in my bones, in the deepest, most ancient part of me that was connected to her. Someone had stolen my sister, and they had used her own phone to lock the door behind them. And as I looked at Julian, at his perfect theatrical grief, a sliver of ice slid into my heart. He was the one who benefited the most from this narrative. The jilted groom, a tragic figure worthy of sympathy. I looked from his face to the soulless text on my phone screen, and I knew with a certainty that terrified me that this was not a story about a runaway bride. This was a story about something much, much darker. And I was the only one who seemed to be reading it correctly. The next 24 hours were a blur of managed chaos. Julian, with a stoicism that everyone called admirable and I called suspicious, handled the guests. He made a brief, heartbreaking announcement about Maya having a personal crisis and needing space, a story that was just vague enough to be believable and just dramatic enough to be satisfyingly juicy for the gossips. He canceled the caterers, the band, the florist. He moved with a chilling efficiency, dismantling the architecture of their future as if he were simply packing away holiday decorations. He was a man cleaning up a mess, not a man whose heart had been shattered. My mother collapsed into a state of medicated grief, taking to her bed and refusing to speak to anyone but her doctor. It left me untethered, floating in a sea of disbelief, while everyone else seemed to have found an anchor in the runaway bride narrative. They accepted it. They mourned the wedding, not the woman. They talked about pre-wedding jitters, about the pressure she must have been under, about how it's always the quiet ones. They were writing Maya's story for her, and every word felt like a lie. The police were called, but not by us. The venue manager, a pragmatic man with liability on his mind, made the call. 2 uniformed officers arrived, their presence both a relief and a source of fresh terror. They were polite, professional, and utterly unconvinced that a crime had been committed. I sat with them in the grand library of the estate, Julian beside me, holding my hand in a grip that was meant to be comforting but felt like a cage. He showed them the text. "You see, officer," he said, his voice thick with sorrow. "She's an adult. She made a choice. The last thing I want to do is betray her trust by turning this into a manhunt she never wanted." The older of the two officers, a man with tired eyes and a weary mustache, nodded slowly. "We see this from time to time, sir. The pressure gets to be too much. She'll likely turn up in a few days, maybe a week, once she's had time to think." He turned his gaze to me. Did she seem unhappy? Depressed? I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them about the locket, about the driver's license, about the cold dread coiling in my stomach. But how could I explain a feeling? How could I articulate a certainty based on nothing more than a sister's intuition and a misplaced piece of punctuation? She was stressed, I admitted, my voice small. But not this. She would never do this. Not to Julian, not to us, not without a word. Julian squeezed my hand, a silent warning. "We were perfect," he murmured, for the officer's benefit. "I thought we were." The police took a statement, filed a report classifying Maya as a voluntary missing person, and promised to keep an eye out. It was a procedural dead end. They had their tidy explanation, and they were content with it. The official investigation was over before it had even begun. I was alone. That night I couldn't sleep. The silence of the sprawling estate was deafening. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window sounded like a footstep, a threat. I kept replaying the last few hours in the bridal suite, searching for a clue I might have missed. And then I remembered the locket. In the chaos of my mother's breakdown and Julian's performance, I had completely forgotten about the locket. It was a small silver heart, a gift from our grandmother. It wasn't valuable, but it was Maya's most treasured possession. She never, ever took it off. It was as much a part of her as the small mole on her left cheek. I had seen her fiddle with it when she was nervous, her thumb tracing the worn engraving. Where was it? I slipped out of my room, my bare feet cold on the polished wood floors. The bridal suite had been locked, but I knew my mother kept a set of master keys in the study. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door, the click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the silent house. The room was exactly as we'd left it, a time capsule of a shattered afternoon. The air was stale with the scent of dead flowers and expensive perfume. I moved to the vanity, my heart pounding. I scanned the clutter of makeup brushes and jewelry. Nothing. I checked the bathroom, the bedside table. Nothing. My hope began to curdle into fear. If she had left, she would have taken it. It was her talisman, her connection to our family, to our past. She would have sooner left her phone than that locket. I started searching more frantically, my movements becoming clumsy and desperate. I opened drawers, pulling out silk lingerie and neatly folded sweaters. In the bottom drawer of the armoire, tucked beneath a cashmere scarf, my fingers brushed against something small and cold. I pulled it out. The locket. The silver was dull in the moonlight, slanting through the window. I clicked it open. Inside were the two tiny, faded photographs. Our grandmother as a young woman on one side, and a picture of Maya and me as children on the other, all gap-toothed grins and matching dresses. She hadn't just left it behind, she had hidden it. It was a message, a breadcrumb. This wasn't a choice, it was a cry for help. I sank to the floor, clutching the locket in my fist, the sharp edges of the heart digging into my palm. The cold metal was a stark, physical confirmation of the terror that had been whispering in my mind. Maya hadn't run away. She had been taken, and the person who had taken her was now sleeping peacefully under the same roof, playing the part of the grieving fiancé with chilling perfection. The text message wasn't a goodbye. It was a smokescreen, and Julian was the one holding the match. I knew then that I couldn't rely on the police. I couldn't rely on my family. I had to find the truth myself. And I had to do it without letting Julian know that I saw through his act. From now on, I would have to play a part too. The grieving, confused sister, lost in a fog of sorrow, accepting the unacceptable. I had to get closer to him, into his life, into their home. Because somewhere in the life they had built together, there had to be a clue that would tell me where he had hidden my sister. In the week that followed, the world settled into a new, grotesque version of normal. The wedding that never was became a local tragedy, a cautionary tale whispered about in coffee shops and grocery store aisles. Julian played his part to perfection. He was a pillar of quiet strength, a man bearing an impossible burden with grace. He organized a small press statement, his voice cracking just enough to be convincing, asking for privacy and for people to respect Maya's decision. He was a master puppeteer, and everyone, my mother, our friends, the media, was a marionette dancing to his tune. I played my part too. I cried. I allowed him to comfort me. I nodded along when he spoke about how we had all missed the signs, how Maya had been hiding a deep well of unhappiness. Every word of agreement was acid in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I needed his trust. I needed him to see me as a fragile, grieving sister, not as a threat. I need to feel close to her, I told him one afternoon, my voice carefully calibrated to sound broken. I need to be where she was. Can I help you pack up her things at the house? I know it's a lot to ask, but I can't just sit here. His eyes, a shade of blue that people always described as sincere, softened with sympathy. Of course, Alara, I was going to ask you. I can't do it alone. It was the invitation I had been waiting for. Their house, a modern glass and steel structure overlooking a lake, had always felt cold to me, more like a showroom than a home. It was Julian's taste, not Maya's. She had tried to warm it up with books and plants and brightly colored throws, but her efforts were always overwhelmed by the sterile architecture. As I walked through the door a few days later, carrying a stack of empty boxes, the silence inside was profound. It was the silence of absence, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Julian had made coffee, a gesture of domestic normality that felt obscene. Her office is this way, he said, leading me down a hallway. I haven't been able to bring myself to touch anything. Maya's office was the one room in the house that felt truly hers. The walls were lined with bookshelves groaning with novels. A large, messy corkboard was covered in notes, photos, and ticket stubs. Her desk was a controlled chaos of papers and pens. It was a room that hummed with the energy of her mind, and it was here, I knew, that I would find something. While Julian was busy in the kitchen, I began my search. I started with the obvious, her laptop. I powered it on, my heart thudding, password protected. I tried her birthday, our dog's name, our mother's maiden name. Nothing. Julian walked in, carrying 2 mugs. Trying to find something? He asked, his tone light, but his eyes were sharp. Just looking at her photos, I lied, quickly closing the laptop. Remembering. He smiled, a sad, knowing smile that didn't reach his eyes. She loved that old thing, spent hours on it. He set the mug down on her desk and began sorting through a stack of papers. His movements casual, but I could feel him watching me. I had to be more careful. I spent the next hour packing books into boxes, my mind racing. I needed a distraction, something that would get him out of the room for more than a few seconds. I feigned a coughing fit, then accidentally knocked my full mug of coffee over, splashing it all over his expensive gray sweater. "Oh my God, Julian, I am so sorry," I gasped, dabbing at his chest with a tissue. "I'm such a mess." It's fine," he said, but his jaw was tight with annoyance. He stood up. "I'm going to go change, don't worry about it." The moment he left the room, I moved. I didn't have much time. I abandoned the laptop. He would have wiped it anyway. I needed something he wouldn't have thought of. My eyes scanned the room, landing on the large antique rug in the center of the floor. It was a piece Maya had inherited from our grandmother, a beautiful but worn Persian rug that didn't match the modern aesthetic of the house at all. Julian had always hated it. Why was it still here? I dropped to my knees and ran my hands along the edge. Underneath, near the leg of the desk, I felt it. A slight unevenness in the floorboards. My fingers scrabbled at the edge of a board. It was loose. Using my fingernail, I pried it up. And there, nestled in the dark space beneath, was her tablet. It was smaller and older than her laptop, something she used mostly for reading. It was the kind of device an arrogant man like Julian would overlook. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grasp it. I shoved it into my large handbag, which I'd strategically placed on the floor beside me, and pushed the floorboard back into place just as I heard his footsteps returning down the hall. He came back into the room wearing a fresh shirt, his composure restored. "All good," he said, forcing a smile. "Now, where were we?" I spent another hour with him, my body on autopilot, my mind screaming. I packed boxes, I made small talk, I pretended to cry over a framed photo of them. The tablet in my bag felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, a dense, secret thing that held the key to everything. Leaving the house was the hardest part. Every step felt like I was wading through molasses. I was sure he could hear the thumping of my heart, that he could see the secret I was carrying. But his goodbye was as smooth and polished as ever. "Thank you for this, Alara," he said, giving me a brief, sterile hug at the door. "It means a lot to me." "Of course," I whispered and fled to my car. I didn't breathe until I was 3 blocks away. Then I pulled over to the side of the road and let out a shuddering sob, a mixture of terror and triumph. I had it. I had a piece of her, a piece of the truth. That night, back in my own apartment, I held my breath and turned on the tablet. It was also password protected. My heart sank. But this was an older device, one she'd had since college. I tried a password I knew she'd used years ago, a silly combination of our favorite fictional character's name and her lucky number. The screen flickered, and then it opened. I was in. The tablet's home screen was a picture of Maya and me on a beach vacation years ago, our faces sunburned and happy. A wave of grief so powerful it almost knocked the air from my lungs washed over me. I had to push it down, compartmentalize the sorrow. I wasn't just a sister mourning a loss anymore. I was an investigator following a lead. I started swiping through her apps, my mind racing, emails, photos, documents, Where would she hide something important? I checked her cloud storage first. It was mostly filled with novel drafts and research for her work as a historical fiction writer. Then I saw a folder I didn't recognize, labeled simply J. My fingers trembled as I tapped it open. It was a digital diary. The entries started 6 months ago, chatty and filled with wedding planning details. But as I scrolled closer to the present day, the tone began to change. The cheerful, optimistic voice I knew so well was replaced by one laced with anxiety and a creeping sense of dread. 3 months ago, Julian was strange about the finances today. I asked for access to our joint savings account to pay the deposit for the venue, and he completely shut down. Said he would handle it. It's not like him to be so secretive about money. He always says, "What's mine is yours." It just felt off. 1 month ago, we had a huge fight about the prenup. His lawyer drafted a new version, and it's completely different from what we originally agreed on. It essentially signs away my rights to everything, including the inheritance from Grandma. Julian said it was just a formality to protect his business assets, but he was so cold about it. When I pushed back, he got angry. I've never seen him that angry before. He said I was being ungrateful. The entries grew more frequent, more frantic. She wrote about him taking her phone to check a message and not giving it back for an hour. She wrote about him installing new security software on her laptop, claiming it was for her protection. He was isolating her, controlling her, and she was starting to see it. And then I found the entry that made my blood run cold. It was dated the week before the wedding. I did something crazy. I hired a private investigator, a friend of a friend from college. I just had this horrible feeling. The report came back today. Julian's company is a sham. It's a front. He's been embezzling from his investors for years, funneling the money into offshore accounts. He's millions of dollars in debt. My inheritance, he wasn't trying to protect his assets. He was trying to get his hands on mine. He thinks it will solve all his problems. Oh God, I feel so stupid, so blind. The words blurred through my tears. This was the motive. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a business transaction. Maya wasn't a bride who got cold feet. She was a witness who knew too much. I scrolled to the final entry, dated the night before the wedding. Her words were barely coherent, a torrent of fear and resolve. I confronted him. I had to. I showed him the PI report. He didn't even deny it. He just laughed. He said I was cleverer than he thought. Then he got very quiet and calm, and that was scarier than the anger. He told me we would talk about it in the morning. He said everything would be fine, but the look in his eyes. I've never seen anything so empty. I'm locking this tablet. I'm hiding it. I don't know what he's going to do. I'm going to call off the wedding tomorrow. I'm going to call the police. I have to. I'm scared. He just came into the room. He's smiling. He has a glass of champagne. He says we should toast to our future, no matter what it holds. I don't want to drink it. The entry ended there, abruptly, mid-thought. I could picture it so clearly. Maya typing frantically, her heart pounding, Julian advancing on her, with a smile that was a death mask, holding a glass that was almost certainly drugged. He had been planning it. He had a contingency for her finding out. My grief was a physical thing now, a heavy, crushing weight in my chest, but beneath it, something else was hardening. Rage, a cold, clear, diamond-hard fury. He had not only killed my sister, he had erased her. He had stolen her voice and replaced it with a 3-word lie. He had turned her into a cliché, a flighty, unstable woman who couldn't handle commitment. He had murdered her, and then he had murdered her memory. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the tablet illuminating my tear-streaked face. I had the motive, I had the timeline, but it was still just a diary. Julian's lawyers would tear it apart, claim it was fiction, the ramblings of a stressed-out bride. I needed more. I needed something undeniable. I scrolled back through the folder, my eyes catching on a subfolder I'd missed. It was labeled Recordings. I clicked on it. There were 3 audio files, dated over the last month. My hand shook as I pressed play on the most recent one. The sound of Maya's voice filled my silent apartment, so clear and real it was like a punch to the gut. It was a recording of the confrontation. Her voice was trembling but strong. The accounts in the Caymans, Julian, the shell corporations, I know everything. His voice followed, smooth as silk, dripping with condescension. You've been a busy girl, haven't you? A little detective. It's cute. Don't patronize me, she snapped. This is over. The wedding is off. I'm going to the police. There was a long pause, and then his voice changed. The charming facade melted away, revealing the monster beneath. No, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. You're not going anywhere. You're going to marry me. You're going to give me that money. And you're going to keep your pretty little mouth shut. Because if you don't, I will make you disappear. Do you understand me, Maya? I will erase you. The recording ended with the sound of a struggle, a glass shattering, and then silence. I had it. It was his voice, his threat, his confession. This was the weapon I needed. But a new, terrifying thought took root in my mind. He knew Maya had this information. He had killed her to silence her. He thought he had succeeded. But now I had it, which meant I was the new loose end. He had underestimated Maya, but he wouldn't make the same mistake with me. He was watching me, I was sure of it, playing the long game. The realization settled over me with the cold weight of a shroud. This wasn't just about finding justice for Maya anymore. This was about survival. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every noise from the street below made me jump. I knew Julian was watching me, maybe not literally, but he was monitoring the situation. He would be waiting to see if I gave up, if I fully subscribed to his narrative. My quiet grief was my camouflage. Any sudden move, any overt suspicion, and he would know I was a threat. I couldn't just walk into a police station. Julian was a wealthy, well-connected man who had already convinced them I was the hysterical sister of a runaway bride. Handing over the tablet felt too risky. What if they had to disclose the evidence to him before they had enough to arrest him? What if he had a contact on the inside? It would be like handing him my own death warrant. I needed to control the revelation. I needed to trap him. I copied the audio files and the diary onto a secure thumb drive. Then I wiped the tablet clean and put it back under the loose floorboard in Maya's office. During a second brief visit, I orchestrated under the guise of retrieving a sentimental photo album. The original evidence was safe, but the copies were my insurance. My plan began to form, a terrifying high-stakes gamble. I had to get him to incriminate himself again, this time in a way that the police couldn't ignore. I had to get him to confess to me, and I needed it all on tape. I thought back to the initial police visit and the 2 officers. The older one, Detective Miller, had been dismissive, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes when I'd insisted Maya wouldn't run. A weariness, yes, but also a sliver of professional curiosity. He was my only option. I found his card and called his direct line, my voice a nervous whisper. Detective Miller, this is Alara Vance, Maya Vance's sister. Yes, Miss Vance, any word? No, I said, my voice cracking for real this time. But I have something I can't explain over the phone. It's evidence. But I'm scared. I think he'll hurt me if he knows I have it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him sigh. Miss Vance, we've been over this. There's no indication of foul play. Just listen to me, I pleaded, my desperation cutting through his skepticism. I know how he did it. I know why. I just need you to listen. I have a plan to get him to confess, but I need you there. I need you to be my backup. I could feel him weighing my words, balancing procedure against the frantic edge in my voice. Maybe he had a daughter. Maybe he had a sister. Maybe he just had a conscience. Where and when? He asked finally, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The location had to be perfect, somewhere public enough to feel safe, but private enough for a real conversation. And it had to be somewhere meaningful, a place that would psychologically prime Julian, throw him off balance. The wedding venue, the sprawling Gothic estate, where it had all fallen apart. It was now deserted, a ghost of a celebration, waiting for the final bills to be paid. It was the scene of his triumph. I would make it the scene of his downfall. I called Julian. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard, I thought he would be able to hear it over the phone. Julian, I said, my voice watery. I'm at the estate. The manager let me in. I just needed to walk through it one more time, but I think Maya left something here, for me. What are you talking about, Alara? His voice was laced with patronizing concern. It's silly, I know, but we had this thing, a sister thing, a treasure box. We used to hide things for each other when we were kids. There was a loose stone in the old boathouse by the lake. She told me once. She said if she ever needed to tell me something important, she'd leave a message there. I know it's a long shot, but I have to look. I was banking on his arrogance. The idea that Maya, the woman he thought he had so thoroughly outsmarted, could have left a final secret message would be an irresistible loose end to him. He wouldn't be able to stand the thought of it. He would have to come to see for himself, to make sure his perfect crime was still perfect. Stay there, he said, his voice tight. I'm on my way. You shouldn't be alone. I hung up the phone, my hand slick with sweat. I had the wire Detective Miller had given me taped to my skin, the tiny microphone hidden in the collar of my jacket. Miller and a small plainclothes team were hidden in the woods surrounding the boathouse, close enough to hear everything, far enough not to be seen. The waiting was the worst part. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, menacing shadows across the lawn. The boathouse was a dark, dilapidated structure at the edge of the glassy lake, smelling of damp wood and decay. This was where it would end, one way or another. I saw his car pull up the long gravel driveway. He got out and walked towards me, a tall, handsome silhouette against the dying light. He had his concerned face on, but as he got closer, I could see the tension in his jaw, the predatory glint in his eyes. He wasn't here to comfort me. He was here to assess a threat. Alara, he said, his voice a soft caress. This is morbid. You should be at home. I had to check, I said, my voice trembling. I led him into the dim interior of the boathouse. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the grimy window. It's over here. I pointed to a section of the old stone foundation. The loose stone. He watched me, his arms crossed, a small, smug smile playing on his lips. You're chasing ghosts. She's gone. You need to accept that. She knew Julian, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I turned to face him. She knew about the money, about the company. She knew you were a fraud. The smile vanished. His face went blank, his eyes turning as cold and hard as river stones. The mask was gone. I was looking at the real Julian for the first time. What did you just say? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The game had begun. The air in the boathouse grew thick and cold, heavy with unspoken violence. Julian took a step closer, his physical presence suddenly overwhelming in the small space. The charming, grieving fiancé was gone, replaced by a predator that had just realized its prey was not as helpless as it seemed. Where did you hear that? He asked again, his voice a low growl. He was trying to pinpoint the source of the leak, to understand how his carefully constructed reality had sprung a hole. She told me, I lied, my voice shaking but steady. Weeks ago, she was scared. She made a recording of you, Julian, a recording of you threatening her. I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes, quickly suppressed. He was mentally retracing his steps, searching for his mistake. She was paranoid, he scoffed, but the denial was weak, brittle. The wedding pressure was getting to her. She was imagining things. Was she imagining the offshore accounts? Was she imagining the PI report? She had it all, a whole file. She was going to leave you and go to the police. That's why you had to stop her, isn't it? I was reciting the diary back to him, using Maya's own discoveries as my weapon. Each fact I stated was a blow against his composure. He took another step, closing the distance between us. The scent of his expensive cologne, a scent I once associated with happy family dinners, now smelled like decay. You have no idea what you're talking about, he hissed, his face contorting into a sneer. Maya was weak. She didn't have the stomach for the life I was giving her. She was going to ruin everything for both of us. It was a confession wrapped in the guise of an excuse. My heart was a frantic bird, beating against the cage of my ribs, but I had to keep him talking. The wire was recording everything. Detective Miller was listening. So you killed her, I said, the words tasting like poison. You killed her on the night before her wedding. He laughed, a short, ugly bark of a sound that echoed in the dusty air. Killed her? Don't be so dramatic, Alara. I just helped her disappear. She wanted to run away, remember? I just made it permanent. He was enjoying this, the power of holding the truth, of dangling it in front of me. His arrogance was my greatest asset. He believed he was untouchable. He thought this was a private conversation, a final confrontation between him and the last person who could expose him. The text message, I whispered, pushing for the final piece. That was you. Of course it was me, he said, his voice dripping with pride. A perfect little touch, don't you think? Simple, clean. It shut everyone up. It even shut you up for a while. He was standing directly in front of me now, his shadow swallowing me whole. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his touch shockingly gentle. It was the most terrifying thing he could have done. She was a fool, he murmured, his eyes searching my face. She hid her little tablet, but I found it. wiped it clean. She thought she was so clever, recording our conversation. But I took care of that too. There's no evidence, Alara. There's nothing. It's just your word against mine. My blood ran cold. He had found the tablet. Had he found it after I'd put it back? Or had he known about it all along? Had my entire plan been based on a false premise? For a terrifying second, I faltered. What if the police hadn't heard enough? What if this was all I was going to get? But then I looked into his eyes and saw the truth. He was lying. It was a test. He hadn't found the tablet, or he would have destroyed it, not just wiped it. He was trying to see if I would react, to see if I would confirm that I had it. I held his gaze, my expression a carefully constructed mask of defeated grief. I let a single tear roll down my cheek. So there's nothing left of her, I choked out. You erased her. His smile was triumphant. He thought he had won. He thought he had broken me. I told you I would, he said softly. And now I'm afraid you know too much. You've been a busy little detective yourself, and I can't have any more loose ends. He grabbed my arm, his grip like steel. Maya is right here, you know, at the bottom of the lake, weighted down perfectly. No one will ever find her. And in a minute, you're going to go for a swim to join her. Panic, raw and absolute, seized me. This was it. The plan had worked, but the timing was off. He was going to kill me before they could get to me. I opened my mouth to scream, but he clamped his other hand over it, his fingers digging into my cheeks. He was dragging me towards the open doors of the boathouse, towards the dark, still water of the lake. The sun had completely set now, and the world was bathed in a deep, terrifying twilight. I struggled against him, kicking and thrashing, but he was too strong. My mind was a white-hot blur of terror. I had come so close to getting justice for Maya, only to end up just like her. And then I heard it, a shout. "Police! Let her go, Julian!" The voice, amplified by a bullhorn, cracked through the twilight. The woods around us erupted with light and movement. Figures in tactical gear were running towards us, their weapons drawn. Detective Miller stood at the forefront, his face grim. Julian froze, his body rigid with shock. His grip on me loosened for a fraction of a second. It was all the time I needed. I bit down on his hand, hard, tasting blood. He roared in pain and surprise, letting go of me. I scrambled away, falling to the damp ground, gasping for air. He turned, his face a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated rage, and saw the circle of officers closing in on him. The trap had sprung. There was nowhere for him to run. The arrogance, the control, the smug superiority, it all shattered in an instant, leaving behind a pathetic, cornered animal. He looked from the police to me, his eyes wide with betrayal. "You," he whispered, the single word filled with a venom that chilled me to the bone. Then the police were on him, and he was gone, swallowed by a swarm of blue uniforms and righteous fury. I lay on the ground, shaking uncontrollably, the sound of my own ragged breaths filling my ears. It was over. Maya's voice, her last terrified words, and his cold, proud confession were all safely recorded, undeniable and eternal. He hadn't erased her. He had immortalized his own evil. The aftermath was a maelstrom. The recovery of my sister's body from the lake was a quiet, somber affair, a final, heartbreaking confirmation of what I already knew. Seeing her again after all this time was both a relief and an agony. The vibrant, laughing woman I loved was gone, but at least she was found. At least she could be laid to rest. The trial was a different kind of storm, a public spectacle that picked apart our family's life with a clinical, ravenous curiosity. Julian's defense team tried to paint me as an unstable, vindictive liar. They tried to discredit the diary as fiction, the work of a jealous sister. They tried to portray Julian as the victim, a man manipulated and framed by two disturbed women. But they couldn't argue with the recording. Playing it in the courtroom was one of the hardest things I have ever had to do. The whole world listened as my sister's voice, trembling but brave, confronted her own murderer. They heard his casual threats, his chilling condescension. And then they heard my voice, baiting the trap in the boathouse, and his voice again, boasting of his crime with a pride that sickened the jury. When they played the part where he described weighting her body and sinking it in the lake, a collective gasp went through the courtroom. My mother, who had been in a state of numb denial for months, finally broke. Her sob was the only sound in the cavernous room, a raw, primal cry of a mother's grief. Julian, sitting at the defendant's table, didn't even flinch. He just stared at me, his eyes filled with a flat, reptilian hatred. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was only sorry he got caught. The guilty verdict was a formality. Life in prison, no possibility of parole. Justice, in its slow, grinding way, had been served. But there was no triumph in it, no sense of victory. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness where my sister used to be. The media eventually moved on to the next tragedy, and our family was left to pick up the pieces of our shattered lives. My mother and I began the slow, painful process of rebuilding our relationship. The guilt she felt for not believing me, for being so easily duped by Julian's charm, was a chasm between us. But grief is a powerful, if terrible, bridge. We found our way back to each other through shared tears and shared memories of Maya. We talked about her constantly, not as a victim, but as the vibrant, funny, brilliant woman she was. We kept her alive in our stories. I took over the management of her estate, the inheritance that Julian had been so desperate to steal. I used a portion of it to start a foundation in her name, one dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence, particularly the insidious, hard-to-spot emotional and financial abuse that had been the precursor to her murder. It was a way to give her death a meaning that transcended the sordid details of her end. It was a way to ensure that her story might save someone else. Sometimes I go back to the estate. It was sold to a new family who filled it with the sounds of children and laughter, chasing away the ghosts of what happened there. But I don't go to the house, I go to the lake. I walk to the edge of the water, near the spot where they found her, and I just stand there. The boathouse has been torn down, replaced by a small, simple pier. The water is calm now, its surface reflecting the endless sky. I think about the darkness that can hide behind a handsome face and a charming smile. I think about the thousands of tiny red flags that we are all taught to ignore, to explain away as passion or stress or just a bad day. Julian was not a monster who appeared out of nowhere. He was a slow-growing cancer, and we had all mistaken the symptoms for love. But most of all, when I stand there, I think about my sister. I think about her courage in that last hour, confronting him, recording him, fighting for her life. I think about the locket she hid, a tiny beacon in the dark, a message of love and a cry for help that only a sister could understand. He thought he had erased her, but he was wrong. Her love is in the foundation that bears her name. Her laughter is in my memories. Her strength is in the lessons I learned. She is in the locket that I now wear around my neck every single day. He took her life, but he could not take her legacy. And he could not take her from me. She is not gone, she is simply everywhere. I have learned to live with the silence she left behind, but I have also learned to listen for the echoes. And in those echoes, I find the strength to keep going, to honor her memory by living my own life with the kind of courage and love she showed me right up until the very end. The text message said, "Don't look for me," but I did. I looked for her in the dark places, in the lies, in the silences, and I found her. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure no one ever forgets her name. My life now is divided into two distinct parts, before Maya's death and after. The before is a sun-drenched, slightly hazy memory of a world that felt safe, where the worst thing that could happen was a failed exam or a bad breakup. The after is a landscape rendered in sharper focus, the colors more vivid, the shadows deeper. I see the world differently now. I see the subtle cracks in people's facades, the flicker of calculation in a seemingly kind eye. It's not that I've become cynical, I've become a realist. I understand that evil isn't a caricature with a twisted mustache. It's a man in a bespoke suit who brings your mother flowers and remembers your birthday. The foundation has become the center of my world. In the beginning, it was just a way to channel my grief, a project to keep my hands and mind busy. But it has grown into something more. I meet women who tell me stories that echo Maya's in terrifying ways. They talk about financial control masked as responsible planning, about isolation presented as a desire for intimacy, about gaslighting so subtle they began to question their own sanity. I see my sister in their faces, I hear her in their voices, and in helping them, I feel like I am continuing a conversation with her, finishing the work she started when she hired that private investigator. I am her proxy, her advocate. My mother is a different woman now. The perfectly coiffed, socially anxious woman who cared so deeply about appearances died with Maya. In her place is someone quieter, more thoughtful, and infinitely stronger. She volunteers at the foundation, answering phones and helping with paperwork. She has a gentle, empathetic way with the women who call, her own tragic experience, giving her a credibility that no amount of training could provide. We never talk about her initial disbelief, her defense of Julian. We don't have to. I see the apology in her eyes every day, in every small act of service she performs in Maya's name. We have healed, but the scar remains, a pale, jagged line that reminds us of what we lost and what we survived. Detective Miller retired a year after the trial. He sends me a Christmas card every year. Last year, he included a short note. "You were the best detective on that case, Alara. You reminded an old cop why he joined the force in the first place. To listen to the people no one else will." It's a note I keep in the same box as the silver locket. They are my two most prized possessions, reminders of the worst time in my life, but also reminders of the strength I didn't know I had. I never dated again, not because I'm afraid or because my heart is irrevocably broken, but because my priorities have shifted. My life is full. It's full of the work at the foundation, my relationship with my mother, and the quiet, solitary moments when I feel closest to Maya. I took up hiking, something she always loved. I go to the mountains she used to explore, and I walk the trails she walked. Up there with the wind in the pines and the vast, silent panorama of the world spread out below me, I can almost hear her whispering to me. I tell her about the women we've helped, about the new laws we're lobbying for, about how Mom has finally learned how to make her famous lasagna. I tell her that I miss her every single day. Julian occasionally sends me letters from prison. They are rambling, self-pitying screeds, filled with accusations and twisted logic. He still believes he is the victim. He sees his imprisonment not as a consequence of his actions, but as a betrayal by the world and by me. I never read them. I give them, unopened, to the district attorney's office to be kept in his file. He is a ghost from a past I refuse to be haunted by. He has no power over me anymore. The true ghost, the one I welcome, is Maya. She is not a specter of sadness, but a presence of love. I feel her when I look in the mirror and see her smile in my own. I feel her when I achieve something difficult at work and wish I could call her to celebrate. She is the yardstick by which I measure my own life, my own courage. Did I do right by you today, Maya? Did I make you proud? Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I take out the thumb drive. I don't listen to the recordings anymore. I don't need to. But I look at the files, the digital evidence of her last days. I look at the diary entries, the frantic, terrified words of a woman realizing the man she loved was a monster. And I am reminded of the incredible bravery it took for her to write it all down, to document her own murder, to leave behind a trail of breadcrumbs for me to follow. She didn't just die, she fought. She used the only weapons she had left, her words, her intelligence, and her faith in me. He thought he was erasing her, but what he did was distill her essence down to its purest form, a beacon of truth that not even death could extinguish. Her last act was not one of fear, but one of profound, incredible love. She was leaving a message, not just for me, but for the world. A message that says, listen to your instincts, pay attention to the red flags, and never ever let anyone silence you. It is a message I now carry for her, and I will carry it for the rest of my days. Living in the after means accepting that some wounds never fully heal. They close over, they scar, but a part of you will always be tender to the touch. There are days when a song on the radio or the scent of a particular flower will transport me back to the before, and the sudden, brutal memory of what came next is like a physical blow. The grief is no longer a tidal wave that threatens to drown me, but a constant, quiet undertow. I've learned to navigate it, to respect its power without letting it pull me under. My relationship with my mother has become the central pillar of my life. We are more than just mother and daughter now. We are survivors, two halves of a whole that was fractured but not destroyed. We have developed our own rituals. On Maya's birthday, we don't visit her grave. Instead, we go to her favorite bakery and buy a ridiculous, multi-layered cake, and then we go to the park and share it with the homeless, telling them stories about her. It feels more in line with her spirit than standing over a headstone. She believed in spreading joy, even in small ways. The foundation has grown beyond my wildest dreams. We now have a small staff and a dedicated team of volunteers. We've opened a temporary shelter, a safe house named Maya's Place. It's a warm, welcoming home where women and their children can escape dangerous situations and begin to rebuild their lives. I spend most of my time there, not in an office, but in the communal kitchen, talking with the residents. Their stories are harrowing, but their resilience is breathtaking. I see the same spark in them that I saw in Maya during her final days. A refusal to be extinguished, a fierce will to survive and to protect the people they love. They are my tribe. They are my purpose. I often think about Julian's final words to me in the boathouse, his boast that there was no evidence. It was the classic mistake of an arrogant narcissist. He believed that evidence was something physical, something you could burn or delete. He didn't understand that the most damning evidence was the pattern of his own behavior, the trail of emotional destruction he left in his wake. He didn't understand that the love between two sisters could be its own form of forensic science, able to detect lies that a polygraph would miss. The tablet was the key, but my intuition, my refusal to accept the unacceptable, was the force that turned the lock. This is the lesson I try to impart to the women at the shelter. Trust that feeling in your gut. Trust your own perception of reality, even when the person you love is telling you that you're crazy, that you're overreacting, that you're imagining things. Your intuition is your oldest, most reliable security system. It's the voice of every ancestor who survived, whispering a warning in your ear. I still have nightmares sometimes. In them, I'm always in the boathouse. The water is rising, and Julian's face is hovering over me, smiling that empty, dead-eyed smile. But now the nightmares have a different ending. In the dream, just as the water closes over my head, Maya appears. She takes my hand, and her touch is not cold or ghostly, but warm and strong. She pulls me to the surface, and we swim to the shore together. I always wake up with tears on my face, but they are not tears of fear. They are tears of gratitude. It's a dream, I know, a creation of my subconscious mind trying to heal itself. But it feels real. It feels like a promise that she is with me, that we survived together. One of the women at the shelter, a young artist named Sarah, recently painted a mural in the main hallway of Maya's place. It's a sprawling, vibrant depiction of a forest. At first glance, it looks like a simple, beautiful landscape. But when you look closer, you see that the trunks of the trees are formed by the silhouettes of women, their arms outstretched, their branches intertwined, holding each other up. Hidden among the leaves are quotes from famous female writers and activists, and in the very center, painted in small, delicate letters on the trunk of the largest, strongest tree, are the words, "She is not gone, she is simply everywhere." Sarah told me she was inspired by my story, by the way I always talk about my sister. Looking at that mural every day is a profound comfort. It is a visual representation of everything I believe, everything I work for. Maya is the tree at the center, the source of our strength. And all of us, the survivors, are the forest, interconnected, resilient, and growing towards the light. The path forward is not about forgetting, it's about integrating the loss into who I am now. The grief is a part of my story, but it is not the whole story. The love is the whole story. The fight for justice is the whole story. The community of women I have found, the purpose I have discovered in Maya's name, that is the whole story. The man who tried to erase my sister ultimately failed. By trying to silence her, he amplified her voice into a roar that is now heard by thousands. He made her immortal, and for that, in the darkest, most ironic corner of my heart, I am almost grateful. He took my sister, but he gave me a mission, and I will not fail her.